It takes place in the southern Great Plains after a series of man-made environmental disasters. They've ravaged that area, and the two main characters are Lucky, who is a healing survivor of human trafficking that happened when he was in his tweens, and Palestine, who is an older woman who is part of the group of eco-warrior rebel nuns who rescued him. I just tried to put the kitchen sink in here. And just so nobody worries, in this piece, Lucky is 20, Palestine is 28, so everybody's of age. After Palestine told Lucky she wanted to have sex with him, things moved much more slowly, and yet way too goddamn fast. The first kiss was a disaster. Was it 2, 3 mornings after her revelation? And some goddamn revelation, Lucky thought. Behold, there was a 5th horse, and the rider said, "I want your dick." He flinched at the blasphemy and laughed a little. She was keeping him waiting, letting him think about what she'd said, about what he'd done, about what was going to happen. "Clean like tack," she'd said. And here he was, sitting on the threshold of the tack room in the big barn, rubbing soap all over the skirts of the big ranch saddle, getting it foamy beneath his hand, and then working it into the leather. Of course she knew what he was thinking about. Of course she knew he was seeing those studs and not seeing them. Seeing instead his hand working his cum into her skin, her tits, that soft part of her belly around her navel, and then sliding lower until his fingers slipped into the split peach of her cum. That first kiss. Lucky had come up from the mushroom cellar where the new logs of mycelium were incubated. The heat of a Llano morning, after the moist, cool darkness of the cellar, was so harsh he could feel his skin turning to jerky. Before his time in the boys' prison, people had told him tales about cooler places where a body could count on rain maybe every other month, where stuff like fluffy hail fell from the sky, places with outlandish names like Eau Claire, Lake of the Woods, Pomme de Terre. Why, Lucky, those weren't lies, Palestine had said when he told her of these half-remembered stories. That's all up north of Raddyland, 1,000 miles from here. You want to go? I'll take you. And then she'd flash that witch's smile at him, half skull, half angel. 5 years with the nun, and he still couldn't plumb that casual kindness with no weight on a payback. It had all hit him then, as he stood blinking in the brassy sun, and then caught sight of her walking toward the airship field. He ran up to her and caught her by the shoulder, and even before she could say a word, he wound his left arm around her and caught the back of her head in his right hand and put his mouth on hers. One moment he was in the cool sleekness of her mouth, and the next he was on his ass, almost able to focus. He spent several seconds blinking at her boots until he could grasp the hand she reached down to him. When she helped him to his feet, his head thundered with pain, and he groaned before he could bite back the sound. "That serves you right," she said. "You just went for me without a thought in your head, didn't you? Didn't anyone ever tell you grabbing a prize fighter is just a terrible idea?" "God damn, woman," he managed. "You told me last night you wanted me. What do you do to people you don't want?" She laughed and lifted her hand to his face. "Poor baby." She leaned up to him, her fingers light on his cheekbone, and kissed him. Close-mouthed, delicate and sweet. "Now you go see Jalise and ask her, nicely, to look at that. I don't think I popped you too hard, but better be safe than sorry." Her eyes darkened as she gazed up at him, even in the sun. You can bet that later on, I'll show you what I do to people I like. And then her hand had skimmed down his chest, his belly, down to rest on his cock, only half asleep now, despite his thumping cheekbones. And maybe I'll let you do something to me. Lucky leaned back against the door jamb to the tack room and closed his eyes. The thought of Palestine squirming, moaning because of something he did to her was too much to resist, and he pressed his palm against the iron bar that was his erection, hot against his upper thigh, even in the heat of the afternoon, and he pushed harder to relieve the pressure. For a moment he thought he was done, but then his swamp of a brain offered him a picture of Palestine on her knees, her lips parted, the unscarred side of her face toward him, eyes closed as she spread her thighs wide open and let him see how she touched herself. He moved his hand down in a slow, sliding press, and again, harder through the denim until he caught his breath. Fuck it, he thought, and after a look around the barn, he unbuttoned his jeans and brought his cock out. He sudsed his hand with a saddle soap and smoothed it down his length, his cock so engorged and sensitive he could handle it only gingerly at first. Long, slippery strokes, careful with the soap and the foot at the tip of the head, were already wet like nectar gleamed. Through the images that flashed in his head, a shimmering slurry of lust and speculation, some things he'd done with others, some things he'd seen done, he held on to the grim joy that any place he put his cock down would be somewhere he chose. And then, just for the sake of being triggery, I'm going to skip over what he's remembering, the time when he was a tween and was forced into sex trafficking, because that's a little bit squeaky, but it's not good. Just imagine what you like, and it's probably there. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to make Palestine go through some of that, show her what he'd had to live through. She ain't never had to truckle or say no, sir, yes, sir. She ain't never had to choose between kiss someone's ass, hell, rim someone's ass, or a backhand to make you lose your tooth. She always been allowed to feel. Even with those burns on her face, she can feel. What if he did Palestine like that? Made an atlas of her body with bite marks, lit cigarette burns, bruises. Teach her how to turn her heart to iron, her skin to the sear and sterile desert that rejected every poisoned touch. His cock began to wilt until it curled sad and scared in his hands. Well, hell, Lucky thought, and instead of orgasm, release broke from him in a sob that tore his throat like a fishhook. If he'd known she would find him there like that, limp dick hanging out of his jeans, with the soap crusted on it, tears and snot running through his fingers, he would have cheerfully shot himself. Air eddied on his bare skin. A flicker of wings sifted down from the eaves as the morning doves took flight. He peeked through his fingers to see her pair of battered boots in front of him, and when he looked up to see her standing tall above him, it was as if he was 10 again, small in a world of monsters that wanted to eat him. Maybe she saw that in his eyes. Before he could cringe and pull up his pants, she was on her knees beside him. Lucky, she murmured. Oh no, look at you all crying. Cool hands on his face, wiping him clean, while he fumbled to cover himself. He wanted to grab her, but he remembered the earlier lesson and drew her to him with some caution. She smelled like the good things he knew, sweat and horses. His breath hitched in his chest, and he pushed the words out. I can't ever hurt you. Fingertips sheathed through his hair. I know that, hon. The flannel of her shirt felt as soothing as her touch. It was far easier to bury his face there than to meet her gaze. The next words took even more work. I don't know if I can be a man. He ground his teeth together. I don't know if I can ever get it up for you. Her lithe and maddening body tensed at that. He realized his mistake. He started to pull away from her, but she held him fast. I thought, he heard her say, low against his ear, you found me desirable. I thought you wanted to take me to bed. Oh my God. He broke free of her grasp to look at her. Jesus, Palestine, you kidding me? No smile now. Her eyes fixed on him, steady within the split setting of flesh and pain. He laid his hand on the side of her face she always hid, under a mask or player's makeup or veil. Beneath the layer of white that turned her flesh to bone, he felt the raised and puckered burn. He read it with his palm and his fingertips, the way he'd seen blind people read their books, traced the cicatrix that feathered out over the plain of her cheek like a map of fiery watersheds. I ain't stopped wanting you from the day you took me out of that hell. 13 years old, and I was in love with a grown woman. Oh, lucky. Yeah, that's some sad shit right there. But this, it's got to be said. He wanted to look away at anything but her face. So he steeled himself to it as he had steeled himself to other things. The stuff I've been through, I think about you, and yeah, I get excited. But then all that, and you know, how old was I? 11, 12 years old? Why hasn't it gone away? Lucky, when I found you, you were half naked in the prison courtyard, and there was every chance one of those wardens was going to kill you. How the hell could any of it go away? It come up through everything I do, and I think about being with you. I think about fucking you, and then it's all ghosts, and I want to hurt them. In my head, that turns into you, and my dick just lie down and quit. He drew a big breath. So that's what I mean when I say I can't get it up for you. I got the wrong thoughts in my head. With the decisiveness of motion he'd come to associate with her, she straddled him, thighs bracketing his hips. Where he'd touched her face, the paint had smudged away, leaving the pink scars to shine through. He moved to touch them again, but she caught his wrist. Lucky, do you trust me? The woman and the burning skull bore into him, and the heat of her against his pelvis, he drank in the sight of her. In renewed arousal and apprehension, he found himself so tense it only gnawed. She found his other wrist and brought both of them up over his head, resting lightly against the door jamb. You say you think about fucking me. She leaned in until her breath washed over his face, until her lips were almost within kissing reach if he moved. He didn't move. Lightheaded with lust, after the bout of weeping, he could barely think. All he knew was that he couldn't bear her to leave. She rolled her hips forward, pressing down into that part of him that weighed like lead that ached with his own damning pulse. He tried to shift her hold on him the tiniest bit, and she responded immediately with a tighter grip. And holy God, that sent so much blood to his cock. He thought it might explode if she ground against him one more time. What about, her lips brushed his with every word, if I fuck you? His breath rushed out in a jagged sigh that turned into a whine when she rocked harder into him. Wordlessly she murmured, dragging her groin back and forth over him. Helplessly he started to push up against that maddening stroke. He wanted. That was all he knew. She said, and shifted up from him. She rapped his knuckles against the doorframe. You're not doing a thing. He managed to choke. Sorry. made heartfelt as she released his wrist and got to her feet. "I want to use my hands," she said thoughtfully. Lucky watched her stroll along the line of empty stalls. He recognized the set of her shoulders, her expression, fingertips tapping her lower lip. The woman was seriously plotting. When she returned, she held a length of rein in her hand, and he almost bolted. She shook her head at him, her smile sparking to a grin. "You just sit there and let me do the work. Sister Palestine is going to minister to you with the healing power of her sage." "Oh, you're killing me," he creaked. "Not at all," she said, and settled herself across him again. "Good boy, give me your wrist." He let her push his arms behind his back, scooting forward just a bit so that there was room between the frame and the arc of his spine. How could he complain about her binding him when that meant her tits swelled into his chest and a lock of her hair caressed his jaw and throat? Compared to that, the snag of leather was nothing. But as she leaned back, he pulled against the bond as a test. The fact that he was bound, the sensation of forcing his strength to no effect, spooked a fine shiver rattling through his nerves. He gasped at the potency of it, and gasped again when she peeled down the still open fly of his jeans. Lucky had never met a girl who knew how to give a hand job, but Palestine was no girl. She dipped her hand into the water bucket to wash the soap from his skin, which was itself bliss. She knew how hard to stroke, when to give a subtle squeeze, and when he moaned, she leaned forward and kissed him. He almost came right then. No warm little kisses for springtime lovers, here with heat beyond the summer sun, the heat that lay beneath the map of Palestine's country. Sleek and hungry, her mouth battened on him with a rough lusciousness that almost took his mind off of his cock. She broke the kiss for a moment to bite lightly at his lower lip. "Listen to me," she murmured. "If I do anything you don't like, stop me." "How?" "You tied my hands. I guess I could wiggle." "Shh. Stop me with the word. Say the airship's name, and I'll stop." "Tardigrade?" She nodded. No way I could ever mistake someone saying tardigrade for a declaration of rapture. She rose up again, kicked off one boot, wriggled out of one leg of her jeans. The crisp hair of her thatch showed stark as a flag between her pale thighs. Mindlessly, he fought the rein again, to get on top of her. At the look on his face, she smiled and canted her hips forward. "If your hands were free, I'd let you touch it, so you could see how wet you got me." Lucky had to swallow hard and run his tongue over his lip before he could speak. "Just one hand." She shook her head. "Someday, not this time." "Christ, woman, you're not leaving me here." "Ah, how could you think that?" She poised herself over him, and he squirmed. Away from her, towards her. In his state, he could hardly tell. She caught his chin in one hand and sent another one of those kisses rolling into him. While her tongue stroked his, she guided his cock and sank all the way onto him, engulfing him, never teasing or hesitating. He shouted into her mouth. No groan, no coy moan. That tight caress down the length of his cock brought his hips straining up to meet her, despite his position, bracing his shoulders against the wood. Every damn nerve in his body snapped to the surface in a shower of sparks. Gasping, he fell back. Like the superlative rider she was, she followed him. "Don't try to buck me off, baby," she said. As she moved in a slow, syrupy grind, her gaze poured into him until he thought he was going to start crying again. His cock had somehow grown and grown, not outward, but into his body, in a burgeoning river that ran straight up into the dry arroyos of his heart. He could not think about how he'd wanted Palestine for so long, or how badly he'd been treated before she took him away, or how sex had always meant money. He could not think, only feel. And just at the moment he realized that he was actually feeling, instead of walling himself off, working on a customer, Palestine snaked her hips in a figure 8 and rode him even deeper. She ran her fingernails up his shirt to find his nipples and scraped them up into burning thorns that pierced him all the way to his balls, and he was wrenched into an orgasm that rose in sheets of dark dappled ecstasy. For a long moment afterwards, all Lucky could do was pant, not speak, nor open his eyes. Before Palestine eased away from him, he felt her untime his wrists, and even then he could not move to relieve his position. He heard the smile in her voice when she spoke. "You all right? Do I have to call Julius in here to give you a checkup?" His back and shoulders and thighs and ass complained as he first fastened up his pants. "Damn if I don't need to wash these again," he thought, and then pulled himself up to sit cross-legged. He could not suppress the mischief in him, rising like a seep in sandy earth. "Tardigrade," he said. "Excuse me? What am I? Well, you're doing something I can't quite handle," he said, his grin so wide now he thought he was going to start laughing, and so crazy as a shithouse rat. She beamed in response, but puzzlement still tinged her voice. Well, you stopped. You cruel woman, you leaving me all cold like this?" "Oh, you!" Laughing, she threw a punch at him. This time, he caught it, and this time she let him gather her into his arms and kiss her until all their rivers rose once more.